The agricultural community is also still concerned, worrying about the long-term impacts of tariffs. More than 20% of farm income comes from exports.
So farmers in more major agricultural states like Ohio are facing billions in potential losses as China.
This summer, as tariffs climb and deals stall, a quiet crisis is unfolding across America's heartland. It's not just an economic story, it's a human one. From the soybean fields of Iowa to the corn rows of Missouri, farmers who once fed the world are now fighting to survive. And for many, the trade war with China didn't just raise prices, it upended everything they knew. This is how America's farmers became collateral damage in a global economic fight.
Down.
Now, international tariffs are especially hurting soybean farmers like Andrew Beeman. At least half of the U.S. production of soybeans are exported, and their biggest buyer is China.
In April 2025, the Trump administration raised tariffs on Chinese goods. Some items now face duties as high as 145%. China responded with tariffs up to 125% on U.S. agricultural exports, striking directly at the heart of the farm economy. No crop felt the blow more than soybeans. In 2024, the U.S. exported $12.8 billion worth of soybeans to China, making it the single largest U.S. agricultural export by value, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. But with combined tariffs now reaching 135 to 145%, that flow has slowed to a near halt. For many farmers, this isn't just a temporary slowdown, it's a collapse. Millions of bushels now sit unsold in silos across the Midwest, waiting for markets that may never reopen. Meanwhile, China has moved on. Brazil now provides over 70% of China's soybean imports, while the U.S. share has fallen below 25% based on March 2025 data. Once the world's leading supplier, America is losing ground, and fast. The consequences are visible. In Iowa and Ohio, storage bins are full. Grain prices have plummeted. Some producers have deferred maintenance or cut fertilizer use. Others are waiting and hoping, stuck between uncertainty and survival. And this happened fast. The shockwaves hit within weeks, not months. What was once a predictable trade partnership has now become a financial trap, tightening by the day.
Breakthrough soon, farmers say they fear they're going to be caught, right in the middle of this standoff between China.
Across the Midwest, decisions that would normally take months were made overnight. Many farmers sold soybeans straight from the field, even at lower prices just to move product. Others changed their crop plans entirely, switching from soybeans to corn or wheat, hoping to ride out the storm with crops that don't rely so heavily on exports to China. It's not ideal. Corn offers thinner margins. But when the alternative is unsold soybeans, the choice is clear. These individual decisions are stacking up and reshaping entire farm economies. More than half of U.S. soybean production is historically destined for foreign buyers, with China taking the lion's share. Losing that customer disrupts not only planting patterns but every business connected to the land. Feed stores are seeing fewer bulk orders. Equipment dealers report drops in sales. Fertilizer and seed suppliers are scaling back inventory. In many towns, the ag economy isn't just part of the community, it is the community. In places like Iowa, a single bad year echoes across school budgets, tax bases, and main streets. What used to be routine business decisions, when to buy, when to hire, are now questions of survival. And what makes it harder is this. The damage isn't driven by weather, pests, or drought. It's being driven by policy. Farmers are used to risk. But this time, it's not nature they're battling. It's Washington. And the uncertainty is worse than any forecast. It doesn't just cloud the outlook, it paralyzes it. Yet the pain spreading through rural America doesn't stop at falling prices or unsold crops. Beneath the surface, deeper cracks are emerging, ones tied to labor shortages, global trust, and a food system stretched to its limits. And for the communities that depend on agriculture, the hardest part may be what comes next.
Now, as you might imagine, many U.S. farmers are worried at this moment about losing their biggest export market.
And it's like, well, we don't have alternative markets for those corn, soybean, wheat, all the stuff that we grow.
Previously, we saw how the trade war left U.S. farmers stranded. Now, we turn to what's behind the scenes, and what may be lost for good if this conflict continues.
Tonight, many of America's farmers already feeling the pinch are worried about the possibility of more challenges. That's because President Trump is threatening to deport millions of undocumented immigrants, creating uncertainty about the future of the workforce.
Farming isn't just soil and seed, it's people. And in America, more than 42% of farm laborers are undocumented immigrants, according to 2022 data from the USDA. President Trump's renewed push in 2025 to deport millions of undocumented workers has triggered deep fears across agricultural regions. In Wisconsin's Dairy Belt, over half the labor force is undocumented. On a 900-acre farm in the town of Wandy, nearly 90% of the work is done by migrants. Without them, production halts. Cows go unmilked. Livestock unfed. One farm owner estimated that replacing his immigrant laborers with American-born workers at legally required wages would cost upwards of $100,000 per employee per year. He said plainly, his farm wouldn't survive 6 months. This is not theoretical. Across New Jersey, Texas, and California, farms are bracing for labor shortages that could wipe out their ability to harvest crops at scale. And if crops stay in the field, they don't make it to market, which means prices may rise for consumers, even as farmers make less. For perishable goods, the risk is even greater. Missing a harvest window by a few days can mean losing an entire year's income.
They could cause some price problems for us, with Mexico being importer of corn and China with some imports of soybeans.
Well, I think all he's doing is trying to scare them straight, so to speak.
The fallout doesn't stop with soybeans. In Kansas, sorghum, also known as milo, once had a guaranteed buyer through U.S. international food aid programs. But with Trump's administration cutting global aid, those programs have gone dark. Now, co-ops are sitting on 1.7 million bushels of unsold milo. It spoils slowly in storage, while farmers lose money with every passing day. In Georgia, one nonprofit that produces high-nutrient peanut paste for famine zones saw its federal contracts canceled, reinstated, and canceled again within weeks. With 130 employees and supply chains tied to 27 states, the disruption affects everything from milk producers in Michigan to sugar refiners in Louisiana. These aren't isolated incidents. They're links in a fragile chain. And when that chain breaks, so do rural economies. Soybeans are more than just a crop. They're a geopolitical tool, one that once gave America leverage in trade negotiations, especially with China. But today, that leverage is slipping. Brazil's dominance in global soybean exports has only grown, while U.S. exporters watch contracts dry up. According to the USDA's March 2025 update, China's purchases of U.S. soybeans are down to 22.1 million tons, the lowest in 12 years. Even if a new trade deal is signed, there's no guarantee those markets will return. Because once trust is broken and supply chains rebuilt, buyers don't always come back. China has now invested heavily in long-term contracts with Brazil and expanded port infrastructure to support year-round supply. That's not easily undone. That's the risk now facing the U.S. farm economy. Not just short-term pain, but long-term displacement. A permanent shift in who feeds the world and who no longer can. This is more than a trade war. It's a turning point. The decisions made in Washington on tariffs, labor, and aid are not just numbers on paper. They are shaping the lives of farmers who rise at dawn, who plant with hope, and who harvest in uncertainty. They're shaping towns built around the rhythm of the growing season. And they're reshaping America's role in feeding a hungry world. As we look ahead, the question isn't just whether Trump's policies will deliver better trade terms. It's whether the country can rebuild what's already been lost. Because for many on the front lines of American agriculture, the damage is no longer hypothetical. It's already here.
As a matter of fact, now both U.S. and China realize how indispensable we are. We are really cannot separate, cannot decouple. And the world economies really need us. And also the confidence, stock market, oil prices, you name it, all hinge on this Sino-U.S. trade talks.
President Trump has declared, "Our deal with China is done, pending final approval from President Xi and me." The latest framework, reached in London, promises that China will supply rare earths to the U.S., while the U.S. will ease visa restrictions for Chinese students. But here in Washington, skepticism runs deep. Many officials, and Trump himself, point out that China hasn't always honored its past trade commitments, including the Phase 1 deal. So, will Beijing really deliver this time? And when China claims it does not weaponize rare earths, is that true? Let's take a closer look. Trump's declaration of deal done sparked headlines, but also serious doubts. The new framework is only an agreement in principle. There's no binding enforcement, no dispute mechanism, and history offers reasons for caution. After the Geneva deal just weeks ago, China temporarily tightened rare earth exports, despite agreeing to ease restrictions. China's own Ministry of Commerce reported that U.S. imports of rare earths dropped 5.7% in May. Meanwhile, a recent AmCham survey found that 75% of major U.S. firms expect to run out of rare earth supplies within 3 months if restrictions persist. Policymakers here also note that China did not fully honor its Phase 1 trade deal, a warning signal for any new agreement. But the situation isn't one-sided. Some of today's volatility stems from the U.S. itself.
Since the Geneva talks, we see some U.S. Lifted, new sanctions. No, actually added new sanctions, but also new measures on chips and on Huawei, on many other parts of the supply.
After Geneva, the Trump administration expanded export controls on chip design tools and warned global partners against using Huawei chips. It also initially kept tight visa restrictions, only loosening them under the London framework. China's response, slowing rare earth exports, was partly a reaction to this policy instability. This tit-for-tat cycle helps explain why trust is now so fragile. Yet publicly, Beijing maintains a different narrative, insisting that its export controls are guided by market principles, not political retaliation.
That is why China always repeated, they say such a regulation or export control does not target at any single country, but for the whole market rule.
So what is China's message? As Yang Xiu, senior fellow at the China Institutes of International Studies, explained that China's rare earth export controls are guided by market rules and dual-use management, not designed to target the U.S. Yang said that export controls are driven by national security concerns and the dual-use nature of rare earths, not by targeting the U.S. Yet the facts tell a more complicated story. After Geneva, rare earth shipments to the U.S. declined, and Chinese analysts admit that U.S. actions contributed. Wang Huiyao, president of the Center for China and Globalization, warned that trust was damaged because the U.S. kept adding new measures. If that continues, he said, confidence will erode further. Brian Wong of the University of Hong Kong noted that China remains highly cautious about trusting the Trump administration, given its track record on past trade deals. In short, when Beijing says it won't weaponize rare earths, many in Washington hear, unless provoked. That leaves little room for complacency.
How can we make sure that after this so-called framework, the United States is not going to do the same thing?
So where does this leave us? For now, the London framework is a fragile ceasefire. There's no binding enforcement. The WTO's appellate body remains defunct. China signals that it will comply if the U.S. refrains from new provocations. But Beijing retains full discretion over rare earth exports, and experts warn that these materials remain a potent strategic tool. Meanwhile, Trump's own unpredictable policy shifts add further uncertainty. With new tariffs and export controls still on the table, the path ahead is anything but stable. And with rare earths still a key source of friction, the stability of this framework remains uncertain. Trump says, deal done. China says it won't weaponize rare earths. But given history and recent actions, caution is warranted. For now, the U.S.-China trade relationship remains balanced on a knife edge. And unless both sides build genuine trust, this latest deal may prove no more durable than the last. We'll be watching.